Welcome, my friends, to Dr. Frank Cutting Edge Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Miller. Our website for this show is www.drfrankcuttingedgemedicine.com. That's DRFRANK, cuttingedgemedicine.com. And at that site, you can pick up some different links that we will have from things that we will talk about at each radio show. And of course, our sponsor is O3 Plus Texas. That's a health and wellness clinic here in San Antonio that does ozone, IV nutrients, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, and other modalities to help you stay as healthy and happy as possible. And of course, today is Valentine's Day. So go ahead. You know you want it. Just go for it. Eat that chocolate. And we can start our low-carb diet tomorrow. We talked about diet a lot in previous sessions and how important it is to try to stay on a low-carb diet most of the time. And we will explain why that's very important for your health a little bit later in the show. Yes, today is Valentine's Day, a day when we remember all those who have given love to us and whom we have loved, be they family, friends, human, or animals. We all know that feeling when somebody holds you, loves you, and accepts you for who you are. It always reminds me of what a patient told me once. If you want to know what unconditional love is, lock your dog and your spouse in the trunk of a car and see who's happy to see you when you open the trunk. So, unconditional love, it starts from the Creator. And so we pray, God, you loved us into existence. Help us to change the world by looking around and sharing that love with someone today. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So, Valentine's Day, and a cold day too. A good day to hug somebody. They say if you hug someone for 20 seconds, you release oxytocin, that feel-good hormone. But from experience, I'll say this. If you're going to try that, you need to let them know what you're up to. Otherwise, after about 5 seconds, they say, hey, get off of me. But as long as we're all together on it, it's good. Back to Valentine's Day. When you really love someone, it is so good, and it is then so tough when you lose them. It's like losing half your heart. Sometimes it's sudden, and it's really tough for the one who's left because there was no time to mentally prepare. But it's also tough if they slowly regress due to chronic illness like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases, or like cancer. Part of our mission at O3 Plus is to help you live as healthy as possible, not just as long as possible. And then when it's time to check out, your transition to the spiritual life hopefully will be relatively quick. Someone told me once that elephants walked themselves to the elephant graveyard. They knew when it was time to go, but they were still in good enough shape. Their joints were working. They didn't have severe arthritis, and they could still walk themselves to their final resting place. But what's been happening more in this country is we're getting chronic diseases that are robbing us of our independence and our quality of life. So we want to help you keep your quality of life. And today, I want to start talking about cancer. Cancer is a tough disease, as any of you who have experienced it know. Almost everybody knows somebody who has had cancer, or you've had it yourself. And it's like, how come we haven't come up with the answers to cancer yet? And there's a new book out, it came out last year. It's called The Cancer Code by Dr. Jason Fung, F-U-N-G. The Cancer Code by Dr. Jason Fung. So Dr. Fung is a nephrologist in Toronto, and he's written a bunch of interesting books. He started out, the first one I read was The Complete Guide to Fasting. And that book is quite amazing. You know, he was, as a kidney doctor, he was really depressed because his diabetics were having so much problem keeping their sugar under control, and then their kidneys were starting to fail because of complications from the diabetes. And what he tried to do and found that worked was to put these people on a diet consisting of intermittent fasting. And he got a whole bunch of them so much better that their kidneys improved, and some of them he even was able to get off of dialysis. So with that, he started embarking on other topics, including diabetes, and then now he's branched into cancer. Some people say that you have type 1 diabetes where you don't have enough insulin coming from your pancreas, type 2 diabetes where you don't have enough receptors in your body to handle the high insulin and to be able to clear out the sugar. And then type 3 diabetes is cognitive impairment and even Alzheimer's. So certainly the blood sugar and our diet and how we handle that blood sugar makes a big difference. And I don't know what stage you're going to say cancer is, but there's definitely a progression in this country. If you look at what's happening right now, many of our young people are eating what all the teenagers eat. It's not really their fault. It's just what is part of the national norm. And we eat a lot of fast food, and we don't eat a lot of vegetables. And in addition, we're not doing a lot of exercise, and we're getting fat. And the reason that we're getting fat is partly because we're not burning that sugar, the carbohydrates, and also because in response to eating a carbohydrate, your insulin level goes up. And if you aren't needing that instant fuel, which you just ate, it will be stored, and that's what insulin does. It stores it for later. And the problem is we're eating too much, and we're eating more of the wrong food. So if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, it's designed to be rapid fuel. And the way we were originally designed is that eating good fats is long-term fuel. So it's more of your maintenance. So again, what we had talked about on previous shows was the importance of doing intermittent fasting so that your body is used to shifting from carbohydrates back to fat metabolism. And in the process, it will burn your own fat and you will be in better shape. So how does that relate to cancer? So that's what Dr. Fung was trying to figure out. And first, he wanted to look at what is our previous understanding of cancer. We know that cancer has a lot of hallmarks, and one of them is just growth and excessive growth. So that was one of the first paradigms of cancer, that it was just characterized by excessive abnormal growth. But we didn't really know why it was doing that. And then we were looking for more and more things. And, when they were finally able to decipher the genetic code, the DNA, and they were able to characterize all the chromosomes, they were looking to see if maybe some of those chromosomes could be the cause of cancer. And maybe it was just one chromosome that would cause a cancer. And according to Dr. Fong, the first one was the Rous sarcoma virus, and it led to an oncogene discovery that this gene led to activation of uncontrolled growth. And so everybody started to look for these genes that were probably causing the cancer. And we felt like probably it was mostly that we had a mutation in a gene and that caused the cancer. But it didn't answer all the questions. So what we now know is that different cancers have different mutations. And even in the same type of a cancer, you can have different mutations in the same cancer, which is really bizarre, because you would think that all of your cancer cells are the same. But what they found was, even, like I say, even in the same cancer, if you pull them out and you look at them, the cancer cells are genetically different in one part of the tumor versus another one. So that didn't make sense. And in the same cancer in the same patient had different mutations at different sites of the metastasis. So if it spread to the lungs, sometimes, always, that one had different genetics as well. So we weren't really understanding why all that was happening. So there must be a different theory, and what they're finding is that it's actually what he likes to describe it as the soil, and you have a, let's see what he calls it here. So you have an abnormal cell, but it really depends on the soil whether or not that abnormal cell will continue to grow. And what he's finding is that the abnormal soil has a lot to do with our diet. And so that's what we're going to go over a little bit more here. So let's go back to what defines a cancer. So a cancer cell grows and is immortal, it doesn't ever die, and your usual cells only have so many divisions and then they clear themselves out. And remember, we talked about that a normal cell will clear itself out with a process called apoptosis. So, and how can we induce some of that apoptosis is by fasting. And so if we do like the 5-day fast, we talked about the prolonged fast before, which we have in our clinic, and you can buy online. But if you do that fast, by the 4th and 5th days of that fast, but it happens even when you just have a 12-hour fast, you shift over and your body starts looking at its cells because it's saying, okay, it looks like we're going to have not enough fuel for a little while, so let's clear out all the dead wood and make the most efficient cells that we can. And so your body will look at those cells and clear them out. But with a cancer, it doesn't do that. And so that's part of the problem is we have sustained proliferation. And the reasons that it has that is from cell signaling molecules and from some of the genes. So also along with some of those genes is your usual apoptosis and cell death from, we have these things called telomeres on the end of your chromosomes. And that helps us to know how many divisions that cell has done. And after it's done about 40 to 70 times of dividing, then that cell is done and it's replaced by a new cell. And again, your stem cells help with that. And we talked about that the stem cells are released with intermittent fasting as well. And they're also released with exercise and a lot of the positive things that we've talked about before. So, but a cancer cell doesn't seem to have that limit anymore because of genetic changes. What Dr. Fung was saying, is that the cancer cell acts very much like a single cell organism. So in his book, he talks about how originally there were just single cell organisms, and that single cell had to do everything on its own. So it had to procure its food. When it had food, it grew. And when it didn't have food, it didn't grow. It went into a spore or something like that and waited until food came around, or it died. So, but it didn't really have to worry about its neighbors. In fact, if there was food around and there was other organisms around, it was all for me. That cell would take all the food it could and just continue to grow. But as we progressed into multicellular beings, some of those rudimentary processes had to be suppressed. And so we evolved with these different suppressor genes that kept the brake on abnormal growth. And it also let us grow next door to another cell. So that involved learning having adhesion molecules. So in order to stick next to another cell, you had to develop these adhesion molecules. And again, then if you're all together, you had to kind of share the food. You had to live together. And the advantage was then you had specialization. So as the organisms become more complicated, they're able to do more things, more than a single cell organism. But in the process, we never really lost those primitive genetic codes, I guess you would call them, that reminded us of when we were a single cell organism. So according to Dr. Fung, every cell in your body still has those basic blueprints of how to be a single cell organism and how to live on its own and how to be selfish and grow on its own, grow as fast as it can without any regulation. And that's what he thinks is probably the next paradigm of what cancer is. So again, I'm not the expert on here. I'm quoting from or trying to explain what his book is saying. And you can always discuss this with your physician if you're wondering about, does this make any sense? And I think it's a theory at this point, but there's a lot of science behind it. So why would a cell start to grow on its own? So if a cell has a mutation, and so we are always clearing out our old cells, and hopefully the stem cells are making new cells with proper DNA and no mutations. But every now and then you'll get one with an abnormal mutation. And so now this cell maybe it's a mutation that takes the brake off of, for example, unrestrained growth. Well, still, it's very hard for a cancer cell, that's kind of a precancer cell, to become a cancer cell because you have so many defense mechanisms going on. You have natural killer cells that are always looking for abnormal cells and trying to wipe them out. It's just very difficult for a cell to be abnormal in your body unless there are a lot of processes that are going amok. So what are some of the things that would make it go amok? And one of them is your energy. A long time ago, when these single cell organisms, they think that it was a bacterium that decided to come with a symbiotic relationship and get inside of the cell, and that's what turned into your mitochondria. We talk a lot about mitochondria. So the mitochondria, we always say, is a powerhouse of your cell, but actually it has its own DNA, which is pretty wild, and that's why people think that they originated from bacteria that ended up having a symbiotic or a working together type relationship with your natural cells. And things that, so you need energy to perform all your duties that we mentioned before, which includes keep your immunity up, repair any damaged cells, and then you have the energy to just do your usual activities. And what's left over is how much energy you feel. So having the mitochondria work well is extremely important. And again, we mentioned before that depending on the food that you eat, you can slow down those mitochondria and make it much more difficult to make good energy. And one of the things that slows them down is fried foods. We've talked about that before because the oils that are used to fry the foods get changed with the high heat. And when you eat, that's what I would call a bad fat. Those bad fats can get incorporated into cell membranes, including in the mitochondria, and they slow everything down. So you need to have plenty of energy for your immune system, which helps to keep these abnormal cells in check. So now we're looking back at these mitochondria, and they actually have evolved to utilize sugar with oxidative phosphorylation. So in other words, they use oxygen, which is a very reactive molecule, actually. That's kind of why we use it in the ozone clinic, because it's reactive, but we can control the reactivity and use it in a positive way. So the original single cell molecules did not use oxygen. You know, at that time in the world, there wasn't as much oxygen until the trees came out, or the plants, and they made, actually it was probably the bacteria first, and then the plants that were using photosynthesis. And so they were able to produce more oxygen in the environment. And the oxygen was actually a little bit toxic to the single cell organisms, but the multi-cell organisms were able to use that oxygen in a more efficient way to make more ATP. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and that is a unit of energy that is made by the mitochondria and necessary to help drive a lot of your cellular functions. So the multi-cell organisms made these mitochondria, and they utilize the oxygen, so they take away some of the reactivity of the oxygen in the process, but the reactivity of the oxygen is actually due to a bunch of free electrons. And so you have to have a lot of buffer systems to handle the oxidative products while you're making this energy. And that was a more complex thing. So actually the single cell organisms weren't able to do that very well. So anyway, what is it that a cancer cell turns out that they use a different form of metabolism. They use glycolysis. So they actually utilize a lot of glucose without oxygen, or sometimes with oxygen, but still they make lactic acid. So why would a cancer cell do that? A cancer cell, as it turns out, if there's acid in the medium, then your killer cells, your immune cells, don't function as well in an acidic medium. So it, again, takes many mutations of a cancer cell to be able to switch back to the glycolysis pathway and be able to make a milieu, an area around this tumor cell that has more acidity from lactic acid. And it also, because in order to do that, though, it uses a whole bunch more sugar, and that's why cancer patients frequently lose so much weight. So they do that preferentially because it gives them a selective advantage. Again, if the cancer cell is turning more into an independent cell and it doesn't really care about its neighbors and it just wants to grow, then it would do best if it would inhibit the growth of anything that wants to kill it and inhibit the growth of the cells around it. And so that's what Dr. Fung says is part of what's going on there with the switch to glycolysis for the cancer cells. And that's what they call the Warburg effect from Dr. Warburg back in the 20s. He saw that effect in the cancer cells. And so actually in some of my conferences, they've been talking about maybe we could, would having more oxygen help to suppress tumor cells? And we think that it does, but it's certainly not the only answer. So again, would ozone, for example, help to suppress tumor cells? And, I had some anecdotal stories. Somebody said they had a skin cancer on their face and they injected ozone under it and the cancer fell off. Well, where's the controlled trials on this one? We don't really have them. I tried it once, it seemed to work, and I tried it the second time, it didn't seem to work. So I don't think that's the total answer. And I really want to emphasize that cancer is extremely complicated. And to me, the best treatment for cancer will be when the oncologists and all the doctors work together. I mean, they were doing some studies over there in Cuba on, they would pre-treat cancer patients with major autohemotherapy ozone treatments, and then they would give them a chemotherapy, and they didn't have the toxicities from the chemotherapy, and it seemed like the chemotherapy worked even better. So I really feel like the future of medicine in the cancer arena, part of it will be probably including ozone, but why aren't the oncologists using it? There's a couple of reasons. One, we never learned about this in medical school. Two, it's not FDA approved for anything, even though it's used in other countries. And three, most of the clinical trials which fund some of the cancer clinics, in other words, they get money from the pharmaceutical companies to try out their drug. And in the process, they let the patients have it for a lower price and everything. But they want to know just what did the one thing do? So if you throw in ozone and other things, it's hard to tell, did that drug really make a difference? And the challenge with cancer is, yes, we need to know those studies, and those are very important. But ultimately, the cures for cancer will be multimodal, in my opinion. You're going to need to have probably a proper diet. You're going to need to have you might need to have a pre-treatment with ozone, and then you're going to have an oncologist who knows how to use all these different things that can suppress the cancer in so many different ways. If you think about it, these drugs that you see every evening, there's a lot of them advertised during the evening news programs. And if they're advertising them on TV, they're going to be pretty expensive. But it always says, if you can't afford them, check with our company. And they have a lot of patient support things. But in fact, some of the leading stock market companies are ones that have anti-cancer drugs, because we're having more and more cancer. And again, we need to kind of look back and see, why do we have so much cancer? And it's likely because of our diet and toxins and things like that. But at any rate, so these drugs are expensive, and but the good part is they're generally covered by insurance or by a patient support program. And the challenge with ozone and IV vitamins and other things that may help to support your immune system while you're going through cancer, they're not covered by insurance. And they're not covered because we don't have as many double-blind, placebo-controlled trials in this country. And mainly the FDA has not approved their use. So part of my goal with this radio show is to get people to understand the potential benefits of ozone therapy and IV vitamins, anything that can work to help suppress cancers, and see how they fit into the mix, and see if we can get some integrative oncologists who can, yes, once we see that one of these cancer drugs works, then we need to blend it with some of these other things that may work and see if we can get better remissions. Even even the good cancer drugs that you see on TV, if you really look at the small print that they have on the TV, it says, they may not work, they may cause death. And a lot of them, if you really look, it only gives you maybe 3 to 6 more months of life. Now, like we talked at the beginning, if you haven't told your loved ones that you love them, well, that's very important to have 3 to 6 more months of life. But it also depends on how many side effects you have. And unfortunately, cancer treatments in this country tend to be one of the leading causes of bankruptcy. So, I mean, these drugs can be up to $20,000 a month. They're really expensive. And I remember I was treating a patient, about 4 years ago, and we were just giving him ozone to support his chemotherapy. But, he was getting, I think it was Keytruda. And he was saying, wouldn't it be nice if they would give me the $20,000 a month and I can decide where I want to spend that money, so that he was thinking maybe he could use it to pay for either a vitamin therapy or an ozone therapy or whatever else he was going to use in addition to some of these other things that his oncologist was doing. But it just seemed like, that the single drug, which was what the oncologist was suggesting, was certainly not going to knock his tumor out completely. So, and that's what we tend to see, again, going back to these interesting cancer cell tumors. So first of all, you have an abnormal mutation, an abnormal cell. It has to evade your normal defenses, and then it has to have some kind of a stimulus to grow. And so that's the next part of what Dr. Fung was talking about, is what is the stimulus to grow? So there's a lot of different stimuli out there, but what he's thinking is one of the main ones is insulin. And that's pretty wild because, as we all know, we've been talking about insulin a lot. Every time we eat a carbohydrate, our pancreas secretes some insulin to handle it. So what exactly is insulin? Why did it come around? So again, if you had a single cell, it knows when there's food around it because it feels it on the outside of the cell membrane, and it's right in the middle of it all. But when we evolved into multicellular beings, how does your kidney cell know that there's food in your stomach or food in the environment? And so there had to be some kind of a cell signaling mechanism so that all the cells in your body knew if we had nutrition at this point or if we didn't. So are we supposed to be fasting or are we supposed to be growing? And so insulin, as it turns out, is one of the cell signaling molecules that tells you that food is available. And if we need to grow, we can grow. So again, in a normal individual, if you have insulin and if you have the usual checks on your cells that tell it, we want to grow, but we only want to grow so much. We don't want to grow immortally. We want to be restrained by the genes that we have developed over the years that let us be a functioning multicellular organism. And so the insulin will encourage growth, and then your growth will stop when it hits the next cell and everything is fine. So the problem is, again, if you think about that one mutation cell, and if it's managed to hang around a while and now it gets a signal from insulin, oh, you can grow. So it's kind of like you had the seed, which was the cancer cell, and now it's starting to get in a more fertile environment, which is insulin. And how did the insulin get there? It was from eating the carbohydrates and sometimes the protein. So that's what he's saying, is that a high insulin level increases the risk of cancer. And that's probably the main point I want to get across today. Because, that's totally related to our diets. Here was a quote that he had from a an NHANES survey. Even if you're not fat, and even if you're not diabetic, the people in this NHANES survey who had the highest insulin levels had a 250% increased risk of cancer deaths. Did you get that? 250% increased risk of cancer deaths if just your insulin level is high for a prolonged period of time. So if you think again about our kids, and if they're eating a high carb diet for years, starting with their habits that they learned from the parents and from their friends, and then it's easy to see that we're having an earlier onset of cancer. The cycle that we get if you have a high carb diet and a high insulin level is obesity, and then we get atherosclerosis, and then we get cardiovascular disease. So if we don't die of the heart attack, then we're also finding, as Dr. Bredesen had found, that the diet also, if you don't include good fats, and if you have high carbohydrates and the insulin ends up with a lot of inflammation in the brain, you can have neurodegenerative diseases. And then if you don't die of that, or along the way, if you get that, then the next thing would be cancer. So if we want to live long and healthy, we have to change our diets. And, I wish there was an easier way, because I love good food too. But good food can be very, very tasty. And we'll have a nutritionist on the show sometime where we can learn better about how to have really good tasting food. But the first part is we have to kind of shift our gut biome so that we feel better about eating good foods. What happens is, if you eat a high carb diet, you will change the bacteria. You have a lot of bacteria in your gut, but it'll shift towards the ones that digest carbohydrates. And so then there is a definite connection between the gut bacteria and the brain. And if your gut bacteria are mostly the ones that break down carbohydrates, and then you don't have any carbohydrates, they will send a signal that says, hey, we want more carbohydrates. And so now your brain will want to reach for the bread or the starch, because that's what those bacteria are screaming for. And then everything calms down, because they're sending those signals to your brain, and your brain will be happy when it has a carbohydrate. Now, the flip side is, if you go through, say, a 5-day fast, like the Prolon diet that we talked about before, now your body is again getting used to burning fats as well. And so in the process, you will change your gut bacteria, and now you have a little bit more balance of the bacteria that eat the carbohydrates and the ones that eat the fats. And so when you're hungry, if you switch to a more low carbohydrate diet, more of a ketogenic type of a diet, then when you start to get hungry, now your body actually wants to have more fat, more of the good fats, and the foods that have the good fats and the medium protein and the low carbohydrate type diet. So, again, the good fats tend to be things like avocados, nuts, seeds, the fish that don't have mercury in them. So those fish, the acronym is SMASH, SMASH. That stands for salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. So they're all small fish. And why do we want that? Because we don't want to add more toxins from the bigger fish. So you can occasionally have tuna fish, but if you have the option in the store, they have tuna fish in packages and they have salmon in packages, and you're better off if you go with the salmon. Some people don't like any of that stuff. So that's our challenge. Then we want to, what about beef? They do have a slight increase in some chronic diseases with beef, but it's mainly in beef that has been fed carbohydrates. So in particular, like corn and grains. So those are your standard beef products in the grocery store. If instead you have a grass-fed cow that was fed organic fields, for example, that didn't have a lot of pesticides on it or Roundup or anything like that. Actually, that is a pretty healthy food. So again, but the key again is the amount of food. You can't just go and eat a 12-ounce steak every day, because that's more than your body needs, and actually you will stimulate another growth hormone called mTOR, and that a growth hormone again can stimulate an abnormal cell, maybe a precancer cell, and it'll say, hey, it's time to grow more. And again, we don't want to overstimulate our precancer cells. Now, I maybe didn't mention it completely before, but we all have, especially as we get older, some circulating cancer cells. I mean, these all of our organs occasionally make an abnormal cell, and your body goes and kills it and keeps you from being a cancer patient. So you can call it a cancer cell or a precancer cell or whatever, but your immune system knocks them out. This happens every day. So, you could think of it as you're kind of on the cusp of cancer, although that's not really true, because it takes a lot of mutations, hundreds of mutations, for a cancer cell to actually take enough breaks off of its growth to make enough mutations so that it can resist all of your cell defenses. It can become a free cell and loosen up its adhesion so it can spread to other places and all those different things. There's a whole bunch of mutations. But those mutations are, those happen when the cells are growing. So if you have a lot of growth signals going on, then the cancer cells are growing and growing and growing, but you're killing and killing and killing them, but eventually you might have a mutation that becomes more resistant. And so that happens over and over and over again. And so eventually you get a cell that is really resistant to all of your natural defenses, and then it becomes a tumor. And then if we start to give you chemotherapy, radiation, anything else, it'll knock it down, but usually it's hard for you to kill the tumor completely, because there'll be a couple of cells that were mutants and they're resistant to whatever your therapy was. And then with time, they can start to grow again and make more mutations, so they become super cells resistant to everything. So that's kind of what we think happens. Again, the diet is so important at the basis of it all. I mean, it sounds so confusing, and it's like, wow, what can we do? So I think the key here is if we can keep our insulin level low, we will do much better in helping to prevent cancer. So there is another cell signaling molecule that Dr. Fung talks about, and that's called AMPK. So AMPK, again, ATP is the energy unit of the mitochondria, and AMP is what it is before it turns into ATP. So AMP is kind of when the cell doesn't have energy. So that would be when we are fasting. And it turns out that AMPK is closely linked to suppression of growth, and activation of the AMPK is associated with better health. So AMPK lowers your other cell signaling molecule, which is the mTOR. So those are the three signaling molecules that he really hones in on: insulin, mTOR, and AMPK. So how can you have more AMPK? Because that is associated with better health. It increases the amount of new mitochondria, increases autophagy, so getting rid of the old cells. And things that help increase that are turmeric, of all things. So turmeric, is a spice. The derivative of that is curcumin, and that may be one of the reasons that curcumin and turmeric are so healthy for us. Also, there's a herb called berberine. I think it's a Chinese herb, but berberine also tends to lower your sugar. It increases your insulin sensitivity, keeps your insulin level lower. Metformin is a prescription drug that also, if you're diabetic, you probably have been on that, or you know somebody who has, and that lowers your blood sugar by increasing your insulin sensitivity. And even resveratrol, and then the green tea. So all of those different things can help to increase your AMPK levels. So that's a lot of science. I know we don't really want to get too much into that. It's just getting getting crazy and complicated. But let's go back to the simple part. What's the main things that you can do to help prevent cancer? So the first one is to increase your glucose. Increase your oxygen utilization. So when we talked about oxygen utilization, that is stimulating your mitochondria to make plenty of energy, and that energy will keep your immune cells good and strong, and they will hunt down any precancer cells and kill them. And the next thing we want to do is make sure that in your body you don't have an area that's stimulating a cancer cell growth. So that's why the diet is so important on that one. So we want to have the foods that keep your insulin level low. And then we want to increase the AMPK signaling. And so that may be with some supplements. So we haven't talked a whole lot about supplements yet. And I want to emphasize that supplements are generally not thought to diagnose, cure, prevent, or aid in any disease, according to the FDA. But again, we know some of the science of how do these supplements work as far as affecting these cell signaling molecules, and so it makes sense that they probably would help in helping to prevent cancer. There's another point. Some of these patients come in to see me, and they've got a Ziploc full of all these supplements, and it's like, wow, do you really need all those supplements? In the old days, you just eat a good diet, plenty of fruits and vegetables, and all the beef was grass-fed back in that day. They didn't have Roundup. They didn't have a lot of the pesticides, and that was pretty much all you needed. But we've been growing food on the same plots of land for a long time. We've been putting fertilizer on them, but not organic fertilizer. So we think that we know what needs to be in there, but the cells are complicated, life is complicated, and there's a lot of micronutrients that are missing in a lot of the foods that we eat. And so probably supplements are important for most people. Then the question is, can we just put them all into one big vitamin? That would be really nice, but there've been some studies on the vitamins. Some of them dissolve, some don't. Do you really need them all? You certainly don't want to have too many vitamins. Sometimes that can be a growth signal on its own. So one of the things that we found that was useful is a micronutrient panel. I know SpectraCell makes one. Other companies make them. And so if you've got a whole bag full of vitamins and you want to know, do you really need all those? Are you too high or too low in a vitamin? You can do this from a blood test, and they can kind of look at a lot of the components. The SpectraCell micronutrient panel I like because it looks at the Krebs cycle. Again, that's what's going on in your mitochondria. And there's a whole bunch of vitamins and cofactors that are involved in making that energy. And you can see where you are with that. See if you need any more. Maybe you're not absorbing one, and then selectively maybe just add one vitamin if it looks like you need it. And maybe we can get rid of some of the other vitamins or combine them so you don't have to take so many pills. It's complicated as a physician when patients bring in all these supplements, and you have to really try to figure out, do they need them? Are they causing any side effects and that sort of thing? And, I know when you read a lot of things on the internet and it says, okay, for this condition, you need this, and this vitamin. And even today, we just mentioned if you wanted to keep your sugar low, we talked about 4 or 5 things that might help. And the problem is, how are they all going to interact, and can we get them from our foods? In my opinion, of course, the food is the best source for most of these things if it's food that comes from organic sources. The problem with organic food is it's frequently more expensive. So, one of the things that the patients have asked me is, well, which foods do I have to eat organic, and are there any foods that I can maybe have non-organic because it gets too expensive? So one of the sites that you might want to look at is called the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, and they have a list of the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So on the Dirty Dozen are the foods that you can that you don't want to have that you have to have organic, or you really should have organic. And the clean 15 are foods that you can get away with eating non-organic. So you can save yourself a little bit of money in that way. EWG.org, that's environmentalworkinggroup.org. That's a useful site. So anyway, again, what else can we do to keep away cancers? And we want to continue to have good oxidative phosphorylation, that is making energy from our mitochondria. And again, if you're feeling really tired, if you come into our clinic, we can do a bioenergy testing. Again, we had Alicia talk about that 2 weeks ago, and it's a way to see how well you're using oxygen to create energy. And we kind of push your body a little bit gently on an exercise bike, and we measure your oxygen. And then we can tell when you switch over from oxidative phosphorylation to glycolysis. And so that tells us, with that set point, tells us a lot about how your body is doing. And then when you start doing other things, getting in better condition with more exercise, or getting ozone, or maybe it would be finding out a vitamin that you were deficient in, or a mineral. And if we add those things, then you can actually see the difference on the bioenergy testing, and you can tell that you're getting in better shape. Also, sometimes some of the things that get in the way of that oxidative phosphorylation are heavy metals. So we're going to talk about them in a future show. Heavy metals actually contribute a lot to aging. And, unfortunately, they're in some things that we really love. I mean, there's a lot of red wines that have a little arsenic in it. I don't know if you saw the article a couple of weeks ago about baby foods. Rice baby foods had, I think it was arsenic. And, so it's low level, but, and then of course we had the problem in Flint, Michigan, where the water system was tainted with, I believe it was lead, right? Yeah. And so, they really, the problem that can cause a lot of, cognitive difficulty as you grow, but all of those things slow down the mitochondria. And if they're slower, all your processes can slow down, including your immune system. And that can also increase the soil, if you want to call it, for a cancer cell to grow. So there's just how do we get rid of some of those heavy metals? Well, we have chelation, and then another way is exercise, just exercising and sweating. Sweating is extremely important, and your exercise is also extremely important. The exercise stimulates mitochondrial growth, but also the sweating helps you to get rid of toxins. I mean, if you think about it, it's a beautiful way that you're created. All we got to do is the things that we did when we were a kid. You ran around, you exercised, you ate good food, you slept well, you were not stressed, hopefully, and we didn't have a lot of toxins. So as we get older, we have to really work harder at those, because now we have stress and we have to work on de-stressing. Now we have toxins, and we have to figure a way to get rid of those toxins. So, if we're exercising, it handles a couple of those things. Exercise generally helps you to de-stress. You sweat, you get rid of toxins, and then it also stimulates the mitochondria, so you use oxygen more efficiently, and that creates less of a good soil for any cancer cells to grow. So that's one of them. We talked also on a previous show about the use of saunas, and that interesting study, I believe it was out of Finland, that showed that over 20 years, the overall incidence of chronic diseases decreased dramatically with using a sauna for 20 minutes 4 times a week. And so we provided a link to that sauna, and you can still get $75 off of that sauna. That's a far infrared sauna that's portable. So you can put it up in your bathroom. You could put it in your bedroom. That's where I have mine. So I get home, I hop in the sauna, and I watch my recorded segment of the news if I want to see what's going on. And then or I listen to a book on audiobooks or whatever. But it's real easy to do. It de-stresses me. I sweat out a lot of toxins. It also helps relieve painful muscles. If you got any muscle spasms or aches, the infrared sauna does that. So that was the far infrared relaxed sauna. So how can you get, again, to all those links? If you go to our the radio website, which is www.drfrankcuttingedgemedicine.com. And if you click on radio shows at the top, then it'll have links to all of our previous radio shows there. And it also you'll be able to listen to some of the shows if you wanted to. Otherwise, you can go to www.ktsa.com and you can go to shows, then you go to weekend programming and you look for my show on Sunday, and we've got a podcast there for all of our previous shows as well. So again, this show is sponsored by O3PlusTX.com. That's O3PLUSTX.com. That's our ozone our ozone clinic here in San Antonio, Texas. And we've been in business for 5.5 years. I learned about ozone and complementary holistic medicine, functional medicine, starting, I guess, about 7 years ago. So I'm a relatively newcomer to this, but we've learned a lot. We're excited that, with the hopefully the end of the pandemic, we can get back to going to at least three conferences a year where we learn all these things and can bring them to you. And yes, we can do some of them online, but it really is useful for us to go to the shows themselves and the conferences, because then we meet all the thought leaders across the country. Our nurse practitioner at the clinic is Kim Engelman, and she has a personal recognition and relationship with most of the thought leaders on ozone, IV nutrient therapy, post-electromagnetic field, all the different things that we do, the bioenergy testing and things like that from the clinic. So I think that's one of our advantages. There's some other ozone clinics in San Antonio, but we actually, if we run into challenges on how to get you to be better, we can pick up the phone and talk to these thought leaders across the country, and they know who we are, they know we do it right, and we can get the right therapies for you. So again, that's O3PlusTX.com, O3 Plus Texas. The phone number there is 210-558-7778. Again, 210-558-7778. O3PlusTX.com, O3 Plus Texas. Talk to Terry, our receptionist. She'll get you an appointment with Kim. Some people say, well, why do I have to have Kim talk to me? And the reason is it's just like any medical therapy. We need to know what you've had done, what are your problems, what medicines you're on, are you allergic to anything? Some of these people are really, really sensitive to any therapy, and we have to make sure that everything is done safely. And then you have to, of course, sign a waiver that says that that ozone is not designed to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. And so it's kind of like, when you go in for surgery, they say, yep, we're going to do this because we think it's going to help you, but it might kill you. It's always interesting when you got to sign all those things, but we want to be truthful. And the main thing also, we want to let you know how much things cost, and that insurance doesn't cover it because it's not FDA approved and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that Kim can explain to you, and then we see how you do. And I encourage you to talk to other people who have been to our clinic and find out how it helped them. Like I say, there's in an upcoming show, I'm going to have some people just talk about how ozone has helped them in some of their different conditions. We talked a lot about cancer today, and I want to reemphasize that ozone therapy by itself does not cure cancer. Most things by themselves do not cure cancer, but I hope that ozone will become a part of helping to cure cancer or delay cancer. It's really hard to get rid of cancer cells, but if we can suppress them and have them not bother you, it'd be kind of like having high blood pressure. You take your medicines and you'll continue to live a useful, happy, long life. If you stop your medicines, things can happen and you can get into trouble and increase your demise. So that's the way that I see ozone. And again, nutrition is so, so important. So now that you're done with your Valentine's Day candy, I want you to think about maybe going on the Prolon diet soon. Again, that's a 5-day fasting diet. You can look that up on one of our buttons on the webpage. Or just start changing your diet to more healthy fats and less sugar. That would be helpful. And then start walking again. If you haven't been out exercising, just start with gentle walking. Again, ask your physician if you have any questions about these things. I'm not your physician. I'm just talking about some of the things that I've heard about. And it's important Everybody is an individual, and you have to be sure that it's okay for your particular situation. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Today we are discussing again the Cancer Code by Dr. Jason Fung, and its the influence of insulin and a high sugar diet on increasing our risk of cancer, and how we can help to diminish that by eating a low carb diet and having intermittent fasting. So y'all have a great week, and hug somebody. It'll make you feel good, and we will see you again next week. Thanks for listening. Take care.